That's what they're used to since 1948, to do whatever they want with full impunity, with no accountability. So why would they care about Qatar sovereignty? Why would they care about the Arab world? Why would they care about the fact that they are initiating a potential third war?
Welcome back to a brand new season of The Tea with me, Myriam Francois. Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe so that you never miss an episode of The Tea. If you want exclusive content and to help shape future shows, you can also join our Patreon community. Think of it as the resistance. The link is in our bio. 2 years into the genocide in Gaza, Israeli attacks have spread across the region. Since October the 7th, Israel has taken more land in the West Bank than at any time since the Oslo Accords. This year alone, over 40,000 people have been displaced, the most since 1967. And in an alarming escalation, in July this year, Israel's parliament passed a resolution calling for annexation of the entire West Bank, including the Jordan Valley. Meanwhile, France, the UK, Canada, Australia and Belgium have announced plans to join the global majority in recognizing Palestinian statehood at the UN. But with Palestinian land shrinking by the day and already divided into non-communicating enclaves, what state exactly are these countries recognizing? And with dozens of leading Palestinian political figures from various factions, from Fatah, Hamas and the leftist PFLP, detained in Israeli prisons, who exactly would lead it? With Hamas's future in Gaza uncertain and a PA in the West Bank largely seen as inept, the question of Palestinian leadership has rarely felt more urgent. But there is one man many see as a source of hope. He's often referred to as the Palestinian Mandela. Hugely popular, and despite over 20 years in Israeli prison, he regularly tops Palestinian people's leader of choice. His name, of course, is Marwan Barghouti. Today, we are joined by Marwan's son, Arab Barghouti, an activist and vocal campaigner for his father's release. Arab, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here with us. May I start by asking you to tell us, in your own words, who is your father, Marwan Barghouti?
Thank you for having me. So Marwan Barghouti is a Palestinian, regular Palestinian, because he was born in 1959, and at the age of 8, that's when the 1967 so-called war happened, where the Israeli forces just occupied the whole of the West Bank and Gaza and the rest of the historical Palestine. He was 8 back then, and he grew up in a very poor family in Kobar, a village that is 20 minutes from Ramallah in the West Bank. And he used to walk to school because he couldn't afford the buses every day for an hour. And he's been always connected to the idea that education is the most powerful weapon for Palestinians. So he always wanted to get his education. And when he was very young, at the age of 11, 12, he had a dog with him, and that dog got shot by the Israeli soldiers. And my grandmother used to always tell me about the stories, how he, kept, stayed at his grave for a week, grieving for that dog. And that was the first encounter where he felt that the occupation took something from him. And that's where at the age of 15 he joined Fatah, and at the age of 15 actually he was imprisoned the first time as a young teenager. And from there he became an activist, he became a young leader, and at the age of 18 he was imprisoned again for 5 years. I remember, I read in his book, he wrote a book called 1000 Days of Solitary Confinement, because he spent the first 3 years in this imprisonment in solitary confinement. So apart, he talked about like the interrogation that he had in 1978. He said the interrogator came to him and he kicked him in the groin. And he told him that a terrorist like you shouldn't be able to produce terrorists in this world. And he passed out because of that kick. And then he basically put his head against the wall and kept pushing until he has a scar that he still has it until today in his forehead. And 25 years later, in 2002, he saw that interrogator. He came again to him when they imprisoned him, and there he was, a very well-known leader, a public figure. He wasn't the young leader that he used to be, and he said that, this is the relationship that I have with this occupier. I will always come back and keep struggling for our people. He's apart from the politics and all of that, because we're going to get into it, I think it's very important for people to understand that he's a very kind person. He's a great father. He's very caring. He's a great listener. He's someone who, when you sit with him, he's always present. He's always there. He's not distracted at all. He's always smiling, always looking for a better future, very positive in his attitude, very warm, and he's, very loyal towards my mother. In his letters, he's always reminding us that your mother is the most important person in this world. And that's something that I've learned a lot about him as a person, and it taught me a lot in my life as well.
And what is he accused of by the Israelis?
They basically, in the court, they accused him of participating in planning for targeting, for operations that did target civilians, Israeli civilians, which is something absurd, because for us, he refused to even have a defense, because he doesn't agree of the legitimacy of the Israeli court to put a Palestinian leader, a Palestinian parliament member in trial. And the other thing is that he's never been involved in military work. Yes, he supported resistance. He supported the Palestinian people's rights of self-defense. He did lead the second intifada. He was one of the leaders of the first intifada as well. He never shied away from his role as a leader. But at the same time, I think it was deliberate from the Israeli government to say that he was involved in targeting civilians. They wanted to cancel his name forever, because they knew and understood his influence in the Palestinian politics. And
how would you explain that influence in Palestinian politics? What is it about your father that makes him such a galvanizing figure within Palestinian politics?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I've asked myself this question many times, because if you think about it, like when my father went to prison, it was 2002. And if you're 30 years or under in Palestine, which is maybe 60-70% of the population, you weren't there when he was out of prison. So most of the Palestinian people have known him inside prison and known about his influence inside prison. And the reason why Palestinians have been consistently choosing him in every single poll for the last 20 years as their most trusted leader, first of all, he's someone who's willing to sacrifice for the cause. The first thing he said in court in 2002 was, if the last thing that I have is my freedom to give to the Palestinian people, and if the price of my people's freedom is my own freedom, I'm willing to pay that price. And we do appreciate, as Palestinians, the leaders who sacrifice for us. The second thing, and the most important thing, is that he is a unifying figure. And in Palestine, we really are hungry for unity. We need unity. And he's someone who's always been talking about unity and the importance of unity, and not only talking. He did, his biggest political achievement was the prisoners' document, where he brought all Palestinian factions and made them sign on a great document that had a clear political vision, and that's what we need.
Yeah.
And, that's why Palestinians trust him.
And we'll come back to this particular document, because it's obviously a seminal document in Palestinian history. But yes, I mean, you referred to, your father's popularity. If presidential elections were held today, he'd receive 50% of the vote, compared to 11% for current President Mahmoud Abbas. So clearly, this is someone who, as you say, despite 20 years in prison, continues to resonate profoundly with Palestinian people. In August this year, the Israeli Security Minister Ben-Gvir visited visited your father in prison. In the video that we saw of this incident, he said, and I quote Ben-Gvir here, "You will not win. He who messes with the people of Israel, he who will murder our children, he who will murder our women, we will wipe him out." The Israelis have a long tradition of using these sorts of videos to send a message, of course, far beyond your father. This incident could have happened between Ben-Gvir and your father in the confines of a cell with no one else knowing. But clearly, this was destined to a much wider audience. What was the real message that Ben-Gvir was trying to pass in this video, do you think?
I think that, first of all, I think that this video and this picture of Ben-Gvir and my father will go down in history as a representation and expression of this oppressive regime. I think that Ben-Gvir is a perfect representation of the Israeli government and what it become. And my father is a representation of the Palestinian struggle as well.
What do you mean by that exactly?
I mean that, Ben-Gvir is a fascist. He's a convicted terrorist, even in Israeli courts. He's someone who is openly asking and calling for the genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people in front of the whole world. And he's being, fairly sanctioned by many countries around the world, including the UK and others. And I think this represents what the Israeli government is becoming. They're becoming a genocidal machine that is only calling for the genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. As someone who grew up in Palestine, we're not used to that. Like, with all the oppression and all the brutality that we're used to from the Israeli government, this is a whole different level. This is a new level.
As in, what's the new level? The openness with which
Yes.
they express genocidal intent.
Yes, the openness and the things that are happening on the ground. Like even the IDF soldiers. Listen, I grew up in the second Intifada. I've seen the soldiers. They came to our house. They put the Israeli flag on our balcony. They stayed for days looking for my father. We were not allowed to leave the room. We were not allowed to, I had to ask them for their permission to go to the kitchen or to the bathroom in 2002. But I don't think that they were as brutal as now. The stories that we hear in Gaza, the sexual harassment, the rape allegations inside prisons, and so on, they have lost their minds. They think they can do, that they are above the law, and they can do whatever they want.
Why do you think we've got to that point?
I think they feel that, they're protected by the international community. After October 7th, they felt that how dare you, as Palestinians, to rise against the occupation and oppression and so on. And they felt that they had every right to do whatever they want with the Palestinian people. And it's because of the protection from the international community. You can't explain it other than that. So they started, terrorizing the population, doing whatever they want, the genocide, the ethnic cleansing, apartheid, occupation. We're going through every single one of these war crimes and crimes against humanity. But I think that, when you get to this point, like even as a human being, when you get to this point of desperation, when you get to this point of violence and madness, you know that you're losing, that you're going down. And I think the Israelis have in their mindset that, okay, the world is already turning on us. So we're going to do this for two reasons. The first one is that we want to make sure that we buy some time and we get rid of as many Palestinians as we can from historical Palestine. So when there is a political solution, they're not 50% of the population. And the other thing is that we need to stick together. And in order for us to stick together, it's fine for the whole world to hear us and to play the victim and to prove to our people that, look, everyone is anti-Semitic, everyone is anti-Jewish and so on. So they're giving them that to stick together. And I think that's very unhealthy and very satanic, if you want.
So your father is one of, unfortunately, thousands of Palestinian detainees. 40% of Palestinian men have experienced arrest or detention in their lifetime. We know that there are over 10,000 Palestinians currently in Israeli custody. You referred to the instances of sexual assault, and children are included within that number. Over 350 children currently in Israeli detention. Similar allegations about their treatment. Why does Israel detain so many Palestinians? Because I want you to help us understand the role that the Israeli prison system actually has within the occupation, right? There's a reason that not only your father, but leading figures of all of the main political factions are in prison today. So what is the function of the Israeli prison system actually within the context of the occupation?
Well, I think, it's an attempt from the Israeli government to say to the Palestinian people that if you dare to speak out against the Israeli oppression, this is your destiny. Because if you go back, for example, to the Second Intifada, if you were an influential leader, you were either assassinated or put in prison. There is no other way. They, killed many Palestinian leaders, Rantisi, Abu Ali Mustafa, and I can name tens of them. They actually attempted to assassinate my father 3 separate times in the Second Intifada. They poisoned Yasser Arafat, and everyone knows it.
Yes.
And this has been their policy always with any influential Palestinian. And the other thing is that as families of the prisoners, they make sure that we suffer as much as them. So when I was growing up, I used to visit my father and so on. And that visitation journey is deliberately very brutal. And it goes for 15, 20 hours. So you can have 45 minutes. You can't touch the prisoner. You can't hug. You can't, you have glass between us, and we talk through the phone and so on. They want to make sure that I grow up learning that if I dare to speak out against the occupation, this is my destiny, this is my future. And you won't have any future. And no one is coming for you. No one is coming to rescue you. And the biggest proof of that is that, my father's kangaroo trial went on and they could get away with it. It was a political trial, and the judge called him a terrorist from the beginning of his trial.
Before the conviction.
Before the conviction, before anything. And when you try to assassinate someone before you bring them to justice, that tells you what regime you're dealing with.
Are you worried about your father's security right now?
Of course. In the last 2 years, my father has went through some of the ugliest torture tactics that you can think of. After October 7th, he was sent to solitary confinement. And before he was sent to solitary confinement, the head of Ofer prison, where he was, came to him, asked him to put his hands behind his back and to kneel in front of other prisoners, because he wanted to send the message, like the video of Ben-Gvir, that if I can humiliate your leader, I can humiliate you all. And he wanted to set an example of him, which my father refused, so they forced him to do that, and that got his shoulder dislocated, and they moved him into solitary confinement. They put speakers at the door of his cell with the highest volume of the Israeli national anthem going for days and days to prevent him from sleeping. No windows in the cell, very tiny cell, spotlight in his face the whole time. And you can't go for breaks and so on. And he was actually physically attacked and assaulted 3 separate times, like major times. He's been assaulted way more than that.
Yeah.
But 3 major times where you could actually, one of them he told his lawyer, it was an assassination attempt.
Right.
It was an attempt of them at least to cause him a disability, to prevent him from playing a political role in the future.
Tell me a little bit about your mother, because much like Winnie Mandela, during her husband's time in prison, your mother's been a powerhouse in advocating for your father. And oftentimes history leaves out these important women who have a critical role in liberation struggles. So tell us a little bit about your mother and the role she's been playing.
I think if history sometimes doesn't mention the role of such great figures, we as a family will never forget that. And as I said, like my father always, in every single letter, there is a whole page about like the importance of my mother, and he's very romantic, and when he talks about her, you can feel his in his writings, when he talks about her, when we visit him, his eyes they change and they glow and so on. because he understands that if it wasn't for my mother, first of all, the family wouldn't have been able to carry on. You need to imagine, my mother was in her late 30s when he was imprisoned. She had 4 teenagers, and she was in the middle of doing her master's degree in law. She's a lawyer. And instead of, the whole system to collapse, which she had all the right to,
Right.
she didn't feel sorry for herself. She tried to, first of all, she founded the campaign to free Marwan Barghouti and all Palestinian political prisoners. And then she founded the international campaign. And that campaign became the go-to organization, not only for my father, but also for all Palestinian detainees. And in 2013, she launched the international campaign to free my father and all Palestinian prisoners. And it was launched from Nelson Mandela's cell in South Africa, and it had prominent leaders supporting the campaign, like Desmond Tutu, Ahmed Katrada, Jimmy Carter, Angela Davis, and many others. I think, no words can express the role that my mother played. She represents the Palestinian woman, and I think the Palestinian woman, they don't get enough credit for their role in the struggle, in the Palestinian struggle. They are true partners in this struggle, and I truly like. She's one of the founders of the first women's rights organization in Palestine in the early 80s, and my father used to always support that. And in the parliament, he's the one who initiated the creation of the first women's committee in the Palestinian parliament. I think that she represents Palestinian women, and she's a leader in her own right. And she taught me a lot. She is very strong, but at the same time very kind.
What's the main thing your mother's taught you as a Palestinian son of a political detainee?
I think loyalty. Her loyalty is just like unbelievable. She's so loyal to our family. She's so loyal to my father. She understood that she has a role in sacrificing as much as my father for the family in order for him to play his role.
Yeah.
Because when he proposed to her more than 40 years ago, he told her that, I'm not going to be a doctor or an engineer. I'm going to be a politician. And the politician in Palestine has, very few options. You're either going to get killed, go to prison, and or if there is a political solution, then we're going to have a normal life. She understood what she was going to, and what she was signing up for. And she thought that this is my role and my part to give to Palestine.
Within the wider struggle. Well, speaking of Palestinian leadership, I mean, I think it's fair to say that part of the bigger picture is the crisis of Palestinian leadership that we're seeing right now. I think it's clear to everyone that Mahmoud Abbas has been conspicuously absent from the international scene for the last 2 years. I know many people from Gaza deeply distressed by the absence of that leadership at such a critical time. And I think it's important for me to state that, obviously, in this context. Hamas has taken heavy hits, obviously, and is weakened militarily. A poll from May 2025 shows approval for the PA, which of course governs the West Bank, around 23%. The same poll found that only 15% of Palestinians were satisfied with the current PA president, Mahmoud Abbas, and 81% wanting him to resign. Now, we could cite many reasons for this, concerns over corruption, the failure to restart the peace process, the putting down of resistance factions in places like Jenin. Not to mention, I suppose, the failure to engineer any, dissipation of the occupation's stronghold. Arafat was no perfect leader. He had his critics, but since his suspected murder by Israel in 2004, the issue of Palestinian leadership has been extremely fraught. For people who are sort of thinking, why is it the case that despite everything they're going through, the Palestinians can't kind of come through with one unifying leadership? Like, how did we get here today where it seems like there's just a lot of dissent happening among parties that otherwise share the same goal of the liberation of Palestine from the occupation?
You know, in order to understand that, we need to go back to 2005. After Yasser Arafat was killed, I think we had the elections, and in those elections, Mahmoud Abbas was the candidate from Fatah party, and he won the elections as a president. And he became president, and then we had the Legislative Council elections, and Hamas won the elections. So they were the ones who were forming the new government. What happened is that the international community did not accept the elections results. They didn't accept the fact that Hamas won.
Similarly to in Egypt, when we saw the Muslim Brotherhood win the elections, that was unacceptable, and Mohammed Morsi is then, dethroned, as it were, removed from power, and ends up tortured to death in an Egyptian prison. Small parenthesis, but
it is similar. So, in order for you to understand, so the Hamas won the elections. It was a perfect opportunity for the international community to come and say, okay, here is Hamas. They won the elections. They are part of the Palestinian government, which means that they are taking steps towards the two-state solution and so on, and the recognition and things like that. And they could have taken that opportunity to draw Hamas more and persuade them into becoming more of a political party.
As opposed to
a militant group and resistance group and so on.
But Hamas has always had both sides, right? There's always been the Al-Qassam Brigade, which would be the military wing, and then the main political party. And that there has been a distinction between the two, right? Just like you have in Fatah and actually in all of the Palestinian parties. Why do you think that it was such a sort of red line to recognize the Hamas elections?
Because so in 96, for example, Hamas did not participate in the elections in an official way. So in 2006, it was very positive for the Palestinian people, for all parties to participate, and Hamas was very important to participate. Now, no one expected them to win, but they did. And they did win because everyone was frustrated by Fatah and by the PA back then. And they wanted change. And, we're a democratic state, and we must respect elections. And instead of the international community to come and say, okay, let's, start supporting the Palestinian people in establishing a true state that is sovereign and independent and so on, that's very dangerous for Netanyahu in this camp, because now you're bringing down his biggest excuse not to have the two-state solution, which is having an extreme opponent. He always wanted and fed on an extreme opponent that he can sell to the world that, look, who's my opponent? I can't have a two-state solution. I can't have peace with them.
Which is why the Islamophobia industry is so critical to Israel's mission, pushing this idea that all Muslims, all brown people, all Arabs, even Christian Arabs, are somehow all extremist ISIS supporters. And actually, on that note, I wanted to just ask you about this idea that is very prevalent in Western media in particular, that somehow it was actually Hamas that was, indirectly supported by Israel in particular as a counterweight to Fatah. Is that something that you give credence to as an idea?
I mean, like the Israelis in their politics, they do that. And I don't think like you could say that Hamas was supported by Israel. That's a wrong statement for sure. Yes, they didn't want Fatah to be the only face of the Palestinian people, because Fatah became secular, became more and more accepted by the international community, and that doesn't support the Israeli narrative, and especially Netanyahu camp. And I specify Netanyahu's camp because if you go back to Ishaq Rabin, even Ehud Barak, Ehud Olmert, these are former prime ministers. And don't get me wrong, they're all war criminals. But they were more flexible towards the idea of an establishment of the Palestinian state. And Netanyahu did not like that, and this camp did not like that. So they started pushing the far-right agenda within the Israeli politics. And in order for that agenda to succeed, they cannot have a reasonable Palestinian leadership. It does not work. So you gotta have an extreme leadership or a weak leadership. which is exactly what we have in the West Bank and Gaza, that they formed to the work. And they own, they own the media in the West, so it's very easy for them to cancel that. It's very easy for them to come and say, we don't have a good partner, we don't have someone who can be trusted. They're extreme, they're this, they're that. And unfortunately, the international community helped them with that. What they did is that they stopped funding the PA after Hamas won until the whole system collapsed. Until after the PA collapsed, there was a division between Fatah and Hamas and between the West Bank and Gaza. And it was the perfect situation for Netanyahu.
If you're enjoying the show, why not join our Patreon community? The Tea is more than just a YouTube show. It's a space to foster meaningful change together. Becoming a patron means you get exclusive content and the chance to shape the show. So join us now, link in our bio. So there are many tactics that have obviously been used to divide the Palestinian leadership and to create a sense of sort of infighting. To what extent has the geographical divide and separation of Palestinians between the different areas A, B, and C in the occupied West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza been designed by Israel to deliberately foment a sense of political rivalry and divisions, do you think?
I think it was done by design. So during the 90s, if you grew up in the West Bank after the Oslo Accords, you could see of course there were checkpoints. The number of settlers started increasing rather than decreasing according to the Oslo Accords, and we were supposed to have, the Oslo Accords had 5 years temporary period until in 99 we were supposed to declare our establishment of a full Palestinian state. But again, Netanyahu came to power and he killed that after Ishaq Rabin was assassinated.
Yeah.
And on the ground, we were, a bit more flexible to go, for example, to Jerusalem, to go to Gaza. I remember the days in the 90s where my father used to take us to Gaza to have lunch and go back to Ramallah.
Which is unthinkable now.
Yeah, I mean, after 2000, none of the West Bank people have been able to, except, for work, special permit, and so on. And even to Jerusalem. I was born in Jerusalem, and I've never been to Jerusalem after 99, I think. So it's done by design, and then you have A, B, and C, and in C, it's more than 60% of the West Bank land.
Yeah.
And if you own a land there, you have to take the permission of the Israelis to build, to do anything, and so on, and you never take a permission for it.
And just to ask you, so you were born in Jerusalem, but you have been living in Ramallah in the West Bank. We've seen a huge expansion of settlers in the West Bank. What has been your experience of this expansion of settlers? How does it manifest in your life and in the lives of people around you?
Well, first of all, it's a very, very scary idea, because you understand that these settlers, they don't have any limits and they are protected by the IDF. So they organize, we want to go to this village, we want to go to this area. They get the IDF protecting them, and then they go. Okay, so if you're a Palestinian sitting in your home, a bunch of settlers came, who are you going to call? There's no police. The PA does not, doesn't have any power to go there. They're helpless, unfortunately, when it comes to that.
But so hold on, just hold that thought for a second. Because a lot of people will be maybe surprised to hear you say that. What do you mean that the PA, which governs the West Bank, can't intervene to protect you from settlers, but they can intervene to arrest resistant fighters in Jenin? How does that work?
Well, first of all, the PA does not have authority in the West Bank. They have, a few ghettos like Ramallah, Nablus, the A areas, which is 22% of the West Bank, which is like, if you take it as a percentage, it's 3-4% of historical Palestine.
Right.
And that's where they exist. And when I say they exist, that's where they have their institutions and so on. But they have no authority. So if the other day was in Ramallah, I was sleeping and I woke up, I heard Hebrew out of a sudden, and I looked from the balcony, and it was Israeli soldiers. And there was a car coming, and for fun, they started throwing grenades and other things to terrorize the population. And it was a statement to the PA that we're here, we're superior, we're the ones who say, and if the PA does anything that they don't like, they go there. And I want to be, very balanced there, because in my opinion, the PA as a body is very important, as a body, because we need a representation. If we don't have any representation, first of all, we don't have a system, we don't have institutions that can govern our day-to-day life. And we need to differentiate between the people who are leading the PA and the PA as a body. The people that are leading the PA, it's very clear and normal that they don't have legitimacy after 20 years of not having elections. No political system can stay standing without elections for 20 years.
Right.
And we don't have a parliament in the first place. So it's a messed up system. But at the same time, I think personally that it's very dangerous that the people are against the PA as an idea and as a body. And they don't understand the consequences of the PA collapsing. It will make it way easier for the Israelis to come and annex the West Bank, to be honest.
And that's the big dilemma,
Yep.
isn't it? It's that, you obviously need a united political leadership to speak
Yes.
on behalf of the Palestinians, but also you would need one that's not completely neutered and is able to actually do what needs to be done on behalf of the Palestinian people. Abbas has actually announced that there would be elections held within a year of the end of the war in Gaza, or the assault on Gaza, I should say. But that does come after the promised elections of 2021, which also did not go ahead. How hopeful are you that those elections that he's promising will go ahead?
I'm very hopeful because, we don't have any other choice. We really don't have any other choice. It will be very, very dangerous if we don't have elections as soon as possible. You need to understand, not having a parliament for 18 years means that you don't have a political system. If you're 35 or under, which is, again, more than 70% of the Palestinian population, you have never voted before, let alone, become a candidate for the parliament and so on. When I go to Europe and here in the UK and I see politicians in their late 20s, in their 30s, it makes me feel that, I wish we can have that, because we have talented Palestinians, we have amazing Palestinians, but we can't go into politics because politics is exclusive for people in their 70s and 80s in Palestine, unfortunately. And we need to change that because everyone is talking about bringing a new president. It's not only about a new president, it's a whole political system that gets refreshed. And new ideas and so on. And the other ideas that I think what we need as Palestinians the main priority, of course, after stopping the genocide and the madness that is happening, but we need to worry about what we can control. And what we can control is having a clear political vision that every Palestinian can subscribe for. And that political vision is there. It exists, but it needs, elections. It needs support from the international community, because the international community has been very, very negative in playing in their role in Palestinian politics. Because as I said, they did not respect the elections in 2006, and that's exactly why we're here. That's why we're divided. And I don't think that even October 7th would have happened if we had unity within the Palestinian people and if the elections were respected.
How would you respond to Palestinians who say, the PA today is just there to put down the resistance? It has no other function. It is there to act on behalf of the Israelis so that it looks like the Palestinians are moderating their own people, but in reality, they're doing nothing that actually helps us achieve our goal of liberation.
I think it's true. I think, honestly, the PA is there trying to please the Israeli government and the international community, and nothing is working. They've tried, having security agreements with the Israelis. They've tried many other attempts. They've tried to condemn the resistance. They've tried to limit and to put, as you said, resistance fighters in prison and so on, and it didn't work. So I think it's time for the current PA leadership to understand that this is not the path. Pleasing the Israeli government is not going to take you anywhere. And no matter what you do, You represent a threat for the Israeli government. You will always represent a threat. As Palestinian Authority, as Fatah. Fatah is always going to be a threat. With its current situation and status, the Israeli government is happy with where they are. And that's why we need to get back as Palestinians and to have internal dialogue and internal discussions. Like, okay, here is where we're at. And the question is, how can we get a Palestinian body that represents the Palestinian people and has a political vision that represents the Palestinian people, and to get rid of these distractions of, these are collaborators, these are extremists, these are terrorists. I don't think that's going to get us anywhere.
What about the role of Hamas within that future? Because obviously we're talking at a time where there's calls for Hamas to demilitarize in Gaza. I should also be clear that Hamas has actually accepted as part of a ceasefire agreement to not only demilitarize, but actually give up its governance of Gaza, which I think is probably worth stating because we never hear this said very clearly in the international media. But, this is very much coming from external pressure from the outside, right? This idea that, Hamas is being held responsible for the actions of October the 7th, albeit that we know that there were other parties involved in the events of that day. And I think many people would welcome an independent investigation as to who actually did what. But in the meantime, Hamas is being completely sidelined from any future Palestinian leadership. Is that a positive development for Palestinian leadership?
Well, nothing that's happening is positive, but we got to be pragmatic and we got to be realistic about moving forward. The most important thing is stopping the genocide. And whatever it takes, we need to stop the genocide.
Which clearly they're prepared to do, yeah.
They are cooperating with them. And you said, like, Hamas is willing to take responsibility of October 7th, and that's fine. I think they should, but the problem is they want them to take responsibility of what happened after October 7th. The 60, 70,000 Palestinians, of course, we know that the number is way higher than that.
Yeah.
The tens of thousands of children, of innocent men and women and civilians, they want Hamas to take responsibility for that. They want Hamas to take responsibility of the starvation of the population. They want Hamas to take the responsibility of carpet bombing Gaza. And that's not going to work. Everyone understands the truth. And the truth is the Israeli government saw it as a golden opportunity to practice a genocide of the Palestinian population. And I think after this genocide ends, we as Palestinians, we need to have these discussions. To reevaluate what happened, what do we think, who was right, who was wrong, and so on. That's fine. But right now, we need to all be focused about stopping the genocide and stopping the ethnic cleansing campaign. And we need to realize and understand that instead of complaining about the international community, we have to understand and accept the reality of the international community. The international community is complicit with what's happening, and we shouldn't expect better. I think our expectations are the reason why we keep, expecting more from the international community. We have to learn from history. 77 years. It's been 77 years for the Israeli regime doing what they're doing, and nothing has changed. So we need to think in outside of the box. We need to think of new ideas, and that's why I really hope that we can have a new generation of Palestinians that can have other ideas. Because I love the movement of the pro-Palestine. It really it's very overwhelming for Palestinians to see that finally we've been screaming for decades, and finally people can see what's happening.
Yeah.
But on the ground, day by day, things are getting worse.
So your father and other Palestinian leaders of all the major factions, whilst they were in prison, issued a framework for a diplomatic pathway to peace. Now, we'll talk about this. This is a historic document. I don't know that many people understand its importance, and I really want us to take a second to really contextualize why it's so important. This document brought together what were competing factions, Hamas, the PFLP, Fatah, and others, So tell us a bit about this prisoner document that your father and others put together, and why is it such an important document?
It's because I think there was a lack of initiative taking in the Palestinian politics. And
with regards
to bringing initiatives that can unify the Palestinian people into a political vision. And he saw that gap. And what he did is that he brought, back then, the Hamas leadership, Islamic Jihad leadership, Liberation Party leadership, Fatah leadership, most of them, they were in prison. So, for example, Saleh Harouri, Sinwar, Ahmed Saadat, every single one that represent their party, they were in prison. So it was easier for him to negotiate inside. So he started writing that. He started convincing them to have this discussion. They disagreed on many points. They agreed on many points, and they came up with something that he called the prisoner's document, and it had every single point that every Palestinian political party agrees on. And, the first point was the establishment of the Palestinian state on the 67 borders. And, I know it's controversial, and many people are like, why 67? It should be 48. It should be the whole of Palestine, and so on. And he used to always, I had this argument with him. And he used to always tell me that we need to differentiate between a Palestinian state and the Palestinian homeland. Palestine will always be our homeland. And the Palestinians all over the world have the right to come back to Palestine, but we need to start somewhere in politics that doesn't work to come and say, okay, we need the whole land.
Can I just interrupt you briefly? Because also what you said, which is interesting within that, is that Hamas signed up to a document that recognized 1967 borders, which is a de facto recognition of Israel. And yet we're continuously told that somehow this group fails to recognize the existence of Israel. So I just want to, put that out as a point of information for our audience, because this is repeated ad nauseum in Western media that, Hamas doesn't recognize Israel. And it's like, well, they've literally signed documents that recognize effectively a two-state solution. But sorry, please.
But it goes back to the same point. And the point is Israel, the current Israeli government, which is the most far-right government in their history, and the Zionist idea since 1948 was the whole land. And the acceptable percentage that they had is maximum 20% Palestinians. And now we're 50%. After, genocide, occupation, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and all of that, and imprisoning the population and settlements and so on, we're still 50% of the land. So that represents a big problem for them. So if you want the whole land, and there comes in a reasonable leadership that is accepted by the international community, that represents the biggest threat for you. It's not the weapon, because they have all the weapons in the world. It's not any other idea. It's the leadership that comes with reasonable solutions. And that's why my father, along with the leaders inside prison, they came up with this great initiative. And it stated that the Palestinian state will be on the 67 borders. The targeting of civilians is forbidden, because that's always been his rule, that targeting of civilians, regardless of where they are, even illegal settlers, you can't target civilians. And the last thing is that resistance should be limited to within the 67 borders, because it's according to the international law. He's always based his political vision on the international law, not to give anyone an excuse to go against that. So when they did that, even Islamic Jihad, Hamas, Liberation Party, and all of them, they signed on it. And it was a historical document that I think is still very relevant and still very important, because if we want to get back to bringing all Palestinian factions together, it has to be that, because it was the only document that all Palestinian factions until today historically signed on. So it's a great opportunity to not to reinvent the wheel and to build on that.
And I think what's really interesting also about this document is, obviously, as you say, it brings together these different factions in a unified vision of a way forward, essentially a pathway to peace, right? Which, was not being discussed outside of prison. And I compare that, for example, to the last sort of major peace negotiations, as they get called, the Oslo Accords in the 1990s, where we have the leader of the PA at the time, Yasser Arafat, in negotiations under American auspices, Clinton at the time, indirect communication with an Israeli counterpart in this sort of, side by side, two states, which, to this day, despite Trump's actions, remains the official US position. What's interesting is that, by the time we get to your father's document, the prisoner's document, the entirety pretty much of Palestinian political leadership is in prison. So they're not being invited to Washington to sign any declarations. They're having to organize within prison. And that document itself, despite essentially presenting what would be a pathway to peace to a potential partner for peace, were there one on the Israeli side, almost goes unnoticed. Not obviously by the Palestinians, but certainly by the Israelis and by the Americans. Now, I want to ask you about the fact that last year, representatives from 14 Palestinian factions signed the Beijing Declaration, reaffirming their commitment to an independent Palestinian state. That also seems to have slipped through Western media's net. Although this doesn't seek to reestablish Palestine along the 67 borders, nor the right of return, it's pretty similar in other respects to the prisoner's document. Do you see the Beijing Declaration as building on your father's work?
I think so, yes. Like on my father's work and other prisoners' work, because they were leaders that were included in that. But I think that it's not taking any, even in Palestine, it didn't take any, attention, any real attention within the Palestinians, because the key word here is trust. We need to trust our leadership in order for us to follow them. And in order for us to trust our leadership, we need to choose our leadership. And that's exactly why elections come in as the most important step that we have control over. My father used to always tell me that we Palestinians have to always be focused on what we can control. There's a lot that we can't control. We can't control the complicity of the international community, the Western governments. We can't control the role of the media of, forming and putting the Palestinian people in the picture of the ones who are doing the attacks and so on. But what we have control over is having elections, having a leadership that truly represents the Palestinian people. And then that leadership, when they take a step, I promise you that all Palestinians will be behind it.
Up until now, the Americans have largely, positioned themselves as brokers for peace in any Israel-Palestinian negotiations. Presumably today, you would not be someone who would support the Americans as brokers of any peace deal. I mean, can they even claim neutral position as a negotiator at this point? How does the US even take control of a peace negotiation when they've clearly backed one of the sides all along?
I don't think we have control over that as well. They are going to play a role, and we need to be very realistic about that and pragmatic about that. And the question becomes, how can we get closer to any administration that comes in the US and show them the Palestinian side of the story and make sure that we can really influence the American politics into becoming more and more, moderate and pro-justice. And I think that we can see positive signs within the US, and not, of course, with the current administration, but when you see Mamdani and when you see the new political figures that are coming up, and you see the figures and the percentage of Americans that are not supporting Israel anymore and supporting the Palestinians recently, I think that you can see the change. But that's why the next couple of years are going to be very important. Our existence is the most important thing, and we need to exist on the land. They are going to try to kick us out because they know that they have a couple of years left in the green light and the open check that they have from the Western government.
I think you were one of the people who initially had a little bit of hope around Trump's election that, there were many people, of course, at the time who were thinking, well, yes, he's a wild card, but maybe a wild card is what we need. Have you changed your opinion on the Trump administration and Trump, I guess, in particular? Is there even an administration? It's just Trump, right? Trump's ability, willingness to seriously broker any kind of a peace deal here?
I'm not gonna lie, the results on the ground are disastrous, to say the least. I think that we're going through the most dangerous period of our history as a Palestinian cause, because now you are even listening to the American administration that is publicly supporting the Israeli efforts of the ethnic cleansing campaign in the West Bank and Gaza and so on. And I think we need to hang in there as Palestinians. We have no other choice but to hang in there. I think that getting closer to the administration would be smart. I know it's not popular. I know that people, whenever I go to a country, people are mad. Like, how could you meet with the government? How could you do this and that? And I'm like, listen, my enemy is not your government. With all due respect, I'm not here to fight your fights.
Yeah.
I'm here for the best for Palestine. And if the best for Palestine, that we get closer to certain Western governments, and rather than to keep complaining about them without being effective at all, no, I'd rather get closer to them and at least impact some and influence some of their decisions. And I think that we need to be very pragmatic about that, because the main priority for the Palestinian people is stopping the genocide. And in order for us to stop the genocide, we have to do things that we don't like. We have to do things that we don't agree with on maybe the value level and so on. But we have to be very honest about
politics.
That. Yep.
Have you been invited to the White House yet?
No.
Not yet. Soon come, no doubt. So currently European states are pushing for a recognition of a Palestinian state. Not all of them, of course. But at the same time, Gaza is obviously going through not just a genocide, the razing of Gaza City right now. The West Bank, obviously, as we mentioned earlier on, is going through the biggest displacement since 1967. An estimated 1,000 Palestinians have been killed by settlers or the military there since October the 7th. That's in the West Bank. Do you see this recognition of a Palestinian state at this time as a positive development?
It is. I think it's a step in the right direction. I don't think that we need to overreact to it. It's not a game changer. We have to be honest about that. It's a step in the right direction because it protects the idea of the establishment of the Palestinian state. And we need to protect that, and we need to mobilize on that and to talk to, to have diplomatic protection towards that idea. And I think it's a good statement by countries who are considered as, complicit in what's happening in Palestine, and they played a horrible role. I mean, if we talk about Britain, we can talk all day about their role in the establishment of the Israeli state, the suffering and the oppression of the Palestinian people, and so on. But if we want to look forward, I think it's something that we welcome. It's a good thing. But it's not a game changer. We need to build on that. And in order for us to build on that, the next step should be focusing on one thing, sanctioning the Israeli government. And without sanctioning the Israeli government, those recognitions are not going to change anything on the ground.
It does feel like somewhat odd timing, I have to say. Like, we're in the middle of a genocide, people are being exterminated, and then you have Europeans who have the capacity to, at the very least, as you say, bring about sanctions, debating the recognition of a Palestinian state. It feels, it's giving distraction, frankly, if I'm looking at it from my perspective on the outside. I'm like, how is this the conversation at this time? Not that it shouldn't be a conversation. Many people have been pushing for this to be a conversation for a long time, but it just feels very odd that this is the conversation at this time. And in fact, here in Britain, we even had it being used as a sort of like, carrot and stick. Well, if you don't stop the genocide, we're going to recognize the Palestinian state. I'm sorry, what? Like, it's very, very bizarre. But let's dig a little bit deeper into the idea of sort of what the recognition of a Palestinian state really means right now, because if your father was released from prison today, the occupied West Bank he would return to would, we both know, be very different to the place he left 20 years ago. For a start, the settler population across the West Bank and East Jerusalem, I don't need to tell you, has increased roughly 400,000 to 730,000 people in the last 20 years. The wall, the separation wall, has undergone significant expansion. The neighborhood I used to live in has been completely cut in two. Restrictions of movements have increased dramatically. And obviously, when your father was arrested in 2002, there was also widespread support, both amongst Israelis and Palestinians, for a two-state solution. Polls back then were around 72% of both Israelis and Palestinians supporting a two-state solution. Today, in 2025, 40% of Palestinians support a two-state solution, and only 21% of Israelis do. So, interesting to kind of correct those figures for our audience, who are often continuously told that it's the Palestinians who don't accept, a two-state solution. Well, according to the polls, it's a majority of Israelis today who do not. Your father was a long proponent of the two-state solution. Are there even two states to speak of today, Arab?
No, I don't think so. I think it's the idea of the Palestinian state is publicly getting murdered by the Israeli government, and they're bragging about it. I think that Netanyahu's career has been on the idea of killing the Palestinian state idea. And I want to be clear that my father did support the two-state solution in the 90s because it made sense back then. He thought that it should be given an opportunity for the Palestinian people. He started even working on it and trying to convince the Palestinian people that this is the right path. And my father supports a political solution. He's open towards other solutions. He's not attached towards the two-state solution. He's always said that the main objective is freedom and living with dignity and having independence as Palestinians. And we shouldn't get distracted about this solution or that solution. This is the Israeli way of distracting everyone. And I think, would support any solution that secures Palestinian independence, living with dignity, and dignity is the most important thing. Because if you ask, many of the people who are arguing on behalf of the Israeli government are saying that we had peace before October 7th. We didn't have peace.
No, but
we had a quiet oppression, that we were quiet, we were good victims for them, and getting killed every year in the hundreds, and slowly they're ethnically cleansing, continuing their project, and they just accelerated that project in front of everyone. So that's the only change that happened after October 7th.
And I mean, of course, the only other alternative to a two-state is a one-state, unless, of course, you're Trump and you talk about, sort of removal, ethnic cleansing of the indigenous population. And a one-state, so far, I don't see anyone advocating for it in a way that would not essentially just mean Israel, right? I think that the fear, correct me if I'm wrong, is that talk of a one-state solution today just basically sounds like an Israeli state.
Yeah, an Israeli state that has different levels, which is what we're living in right now. But it would be more official then, because if you look at what we're living right now, you have 7 million Israeli Jews. Those are the first-degree citizens. Then you have the Palestinians who hold Israeli passports. Those are the second-degree citizens. Then you could debate between Jerusalem and the West Bank if we're third or they're third. Because if you're in Jerusalem, a Palestinian in Jerusalem, you have a temporary Jordanian passport. You don't have a Palestinian passport. You don't have an Israeli passport, and you're not a Jordanian citizen. It's just a temporary document. So you don't exist, basically. You just have a Jerusalem ID, and they make you pay taxes, very expensive. They want to make sure that you leave, and they would help you. They would love for you to leave Jerusalem.
Yeah.
The fourth thing is the Palestinians who are living in the West Bank with the green ID, like myself. And we live under a pure apartheid system. Like I was having conversation with the South African ambassador the other day, and he said that, your apartheid is way worse than our apartheid. And the other thing is that we were never bombed in our homes in South Africa. And the fifth class citizens are the Gazans, the people of Gaza, because they were under a siege. You could never leave. You could never get in. The amount of food is controlled. The variety of products are controlled. Everything in your life is controlled. And then you went through a genocide. So these are the 5 levels that we live in on that land at the moment.
And what do you make, therefore, of this Western obsession with non-violent resistance? The idea that, of course, Hamas has to demilitarize, but even more broadly, this idea that, Palestinians should only resist non-violently to this extremely violent occupation. How do you as a Palestinian react to that?
It goes back, if you read history, it goes back to the European superior mentality on the Middle East, on the brown people, on the black people, in Africa, and so on. In Palestine, we study history. And we study the Algerian history, we study the South African history, we study the atrocities by the Europeans in Africa, in other parts of the world, the British, in India, in other parts of the world, to learn about the similarities. And that teaches you that it's all one struggle. And the struggle is coming from pure racism. And what I mean by that is that they want you to be a cute victim. Okay, if you're a cute victim, we might give you what you deserve. If you're not a cute victim, then you deserve to be a victim. You deserve to be oppressed. And it's never the same standard for everyone. And they look at Israel as a bunch of Europeans, regardless of their ethnicity, of their religion. And they use anti-Semitism as a weapon towards that. We've never had any problem with anti-Semitism. We're Semites. We've never had any problem with Jewish people. We're proud of the fact that Palestine has a history of Jewish, Christian, and Muslims all over. It's a holy land for everyone. Our problem is with one religion to come and say that this is exclusive for us. No,
Right.
It's not. And especially that if you go ethnically, you can tell exactly that most of the current Israelis are Europeans,
Right.
in their descent, or even from Iraq, Yemen, Morocco, Tunisia, and so on. So I think their obsession with the non-violence resistance is coming from the fact that they can't relate to us. They can't relate to our struggle. Because even if you're a European and you're a pro-Palestinian and so on, and you understand our struggle, being there, having those feelings, being there in your home, a foreign soldier coming in, telling you not to move, telling you not to say anything as a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, these are very different traumatic experiences that you can't understand.
Absolutely.
And you can't understand my reaction when someone comes and tells me, you're wrong because you did October 7th, because you did this and that, and they don't look at the root cause. So that's what's very frustrating in having conversation with Westerners in general.
I want to ask you briefly about this attack last week on the sovereign state of Qatar, which was, of course, hosting mediation talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians for a ceasefire agreement, and has been doing that at the behest of America now for several years. What do you think that attack was really about? Because my sense is that it was aimed at trying to ignite a regional response. But I'm curious to hear what you felt the Israelis were playing out there.
I mean, if you look, the Hamas leadership was meeting to discuss the initiative from Trump for the ceasefire and so on. And that represents a big threat for Netanyahu, because if the war stops today, Netanyahu goes back into the problems internally, he might lose power and so on. And he doesn't care. He doesn't care even about the Israeli people, about the Israeli state. He just wants to stay in power.
Clearly, because the hostages was one of the negotiating points. So, all this talk of we want our hostages back, that was literally what was being discussed in Doha when he bombed them.
I don't think he can be clearer than this how much he doesn't care about
Right.
the hostages. If he had a button to kill all hostages, he would love to do that, because they killed many Israelis hostages during the genocide that we're having, and because the hostages, they represent a weakness point for him. Those 20 hostages that are left, which are soldiers inside Gaza, they represent a weakness point, because otherwise he would annihilate way more aggressively within. The only thing that is holding them back is the pressure internally from the hostages' families. He doesn't care, obviously, about the hostages. And the other thing is that he's sending a statement to the whole Arab world and to the whole region that I have no limits. I have the
Right.
green light to violate international law. We're above the law. We can do whatever we want. And I think this is an attitude of a mad person, a mad state that doesn't care about anything. And they think that, you can't blame them as well, the Israelis. They've been given that green light their whole lives. That's what they're used to since 1948, to do whatever they want with full impunity, with no accountability. So why would they care about Qatar sovereignty? Why would they care about the Arab world? Why would they care about the fact that they are initiating a potential third war,
Right.
a world war?
I mean, why would they care? I suppose to me, looking at the attack on Qatar in particular is, you're attacking a US ally, you're attacking a country that has the largest US military base in the region, you are attacking the country that was literally asked by America to host these negotiations. These are all pretty major factors of consideration before such an act of aggression. 10 aircraft, 10 aircraft. And of course, not only did Palestinians die in the attack, but Qataris were also killed. So this is not, a sort of minor side point in terms of the expansion of Israel's aggression in the region. I suppose at this point, I want to ask you about the question of hope. I want to ask you about where you continue to find it at a time like this. And I know Palestinians are masters of this particular skill, but obviously in the last few weeks, we've seen some pretty major acts of global solidarity. We saw the global Samud flotilla on its way to Gaza, dozens of activists. I think it was over 70 boats from 40 different countries, including, really big names like Greta Thunberg, all coming together to try and provide this humanitarian corridor. But of course, these are activists, not governments. These are people, not the international community acting together. As a Palestinian yourself today, does your hope come from people or from governments when it comes to the sorts of changes that need to happen for Palestinian liberation to occur? Like where do you see real hope, not symbolic hope, because there's a lot of symbolic hope. I'm talking about real hope for change.
Real hope comes for us in Palestine in the young generation. And what I mean by that is that this generation is learning from, independent media and independent journalists that are truly putting the picture as it is. They are seeing the genocide unfolding live on their phones, and that's going to make them, they are going to be in power soon. And they are the ones who vote for their leaders soon. And the Palestinian cause will be very influential in every single elections coming soon. And we're not seeing that because it's still very recent.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to take a few years until we see the true impact on that. And I do think that the most important government to change is the American government when it comes to their how they deal with the Palestinian cause. And once that happens, I think that's the game changer that we're looking at. I think that, we really feel overwhelmed with the support that we're getting. It's refreshing to see that in all over the world, in Europe, in the US even, and so on. But I think the real impact will be, and the real influence, when sanctions are on the Israeli government. And those sanctions will not happen unless we have new blood of generation in the politics, in the Western governments. And I see it as happening. My father used to always say that hopelessness is a privilege that we don't have, because his mentality is that losing hope as Palestinians is very dangerous, because that's where you become weak. That's where you become an easy target. That's where because, losing hope for us doesn't mean like, like in the West. I lose hope, I feel down, I feel depressed, and, I will have a few bad days. No, losing hope means you're losing your land, you're losing your house, you're losing your family, you're losing your future, and we can't afford that. And so we have to cancel hopelessness from our dictionary, and just to keep looking at a better future, and to keep dreaming in a very simple dream that is accepted by everyone. And the dream is having our children, Palestinian children, living in peace and safety and security. That's all what we want for our future.
Arab Barghouti, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. And of course, thank you all for tuning in. At The Tea, we are dedicated to amplifying the voices that matter. If that speaks to you too, please do subscribe, share this episode with your friends, and consider joining us on Patreon to keep independent storytelling alive. Let's get the conversation going. Drop your thoughts in the comments, tag a friend who needs to hear this, and share this episode far and wide. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and keep resisting. Thank you for tuning into The Tea. If this episode resonated with you, drop a comment and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And why not dive into these other episodes that we think you'll love? Let's keep the conversation going.